Over the past year or so, one of the big stories in the sports card world is related to Fanatics' acquisition of licensing rights for all the major US sports starting in 2026. Unless they buy Panini before then and take over basketball and football from them earlier like they did with Topps for baseball already. But how much does Fanatics actually have to pay the sports leagues to get these rights? And what exactly is the backstory that led to the sports leagues doing their licenses in the way they're done now? In this video, I set out to answer questions like this that piqued my curiosity and think what I found will be interesting to you as well. Let's get into this. Early history of sports card licensing. In the early years of baseball card production, the card production companies would need to make individual contracts with each individual player. This continued to be the case all the way up until 1967, when most of the major sports unions worked out collective deals on behalf of the athletes. Prior to the time of these union agreements in the 50s and 60s, Topps used to sign players to 4-year contracts, paying them somewhere in the range of $75 to $500 per year, plus the occasional extra gift like a refrigerator or an oven, for the rights to use their name and image on sports cards. In the early years after the 1967 union agreements, I couldn't figure out exactly how much these licensing agreements were costing Topps during the 70s and 80s, but according to an article in the Baltimore Sun in April of 1992, during 1991, the Players Associations of baseball, football, and hockey combined to gross $90 million from the arrangement. About $50 million of that for baseball, $20 million for football, and $20 million for hockey. Interestingly, the Basketball Players Association was making very little from it at that time, maybe only like $1 million. The NBA had signed a contract in 1985 when basketball cards were not popular at all, and that agreement lasted up until 1994 when they renegotiated their licensing agreements. Keep in mind, basketball cards became popular starting about 1986 with the rookie year of Michael Jordan, with the rookie card of Michael Jordan. So it's kind of funny that, it was really just a year before basketball cards became popular when they signed this agreement. What this means is during some of the most popular years of basketball card collecting in the early 90s, the NBA and the NBA Players Association was making very little revenue from basketball cards. At the time, this $90 million cost was not too bad for sports card production companies, as it was estimated that they were making a revenue of about $1.2 billion per year, meaning that $90 million was really not a major cost for them. Keep in mind, the early 90s was really right there in the midst of the very major boom in overall interest in sports cards, the junk wax era. One important thing to keep in mind with all of this is that everything I've mentioned thus far is specifically in relation to card companies' agreements with players' associations. There were separate agreements that needed to be made with the leagues themselves for the rights to use the team names and logos. It's for this reason that you can see today that a large number of basketball card sets produced during the 1970s have players' names and images, but do not have team names and logos. This was because Topps had made arrangements with the players' associations, but didn't have agreements with the leagues themselves. As to the arrangements with the leagues themselves, the leagues weren't actually making as much money from these arrangements across most major sports, unlike the players' associations who were making quite a bit of money and spreading that money back out to the players. But as sports cards were becoming more popular, the leagues themselves, spurred on by team owners, wanted a bigger piece of the sports card licensing money pie. In 1992, the NHL went on an 11-day strike, the first strike that had ever taken place in the NHL's 75-year history, and the main reason for the strike was related to the Players Association wanting to maintain their licensing rights without the league cutting into their revenue. At around the same time in the NFL, the team owners were also making efforts to get more for themselves from these licensing agreements. The battle became pretty complex, the team owners even paying selected players to cancel their deals with the Players Association and sign separate agreements directly with the league so that the league could keep the licensing money in relation to those specific players. And then card production companies would have to work in connection with the league rather than the Players Association to make arrangements to include these players in the card set, but there were a lot of grumblings about how this was being done. Later that year, the Players Association filed many lawsuits against the NFL and against individual players who had backed out of previous agreements with the Players Association. What ensued was a flood of legal battles that basically pitted the league and some players they had brought to their side against the Players Association and the players who remained under contract with them. An NFL licensing civil war of sorts. I'm not quite sure how much the licensing agreements were costing the card production companies, but up through the mid-90s, sports cards continued to be quite popular, so there was a lot of money to be made from producing sports cards. Since there was a lot of money to be made, you also had quite a few companies in involved in producing licensed sports cards. While nowadays there's only one company per sport, Panini for NFL and the NBA, Topps for MLB, and Upper Deck for the NHL, during the 1990s there were multiple companies all producing licensed sports cards. This started to change into the later part of the 90s when the junk wax era of extreme sports card overproduction started to slow down, coinciding with a slowdown in overall interest in sports cards. I'm not sure in exactly what year this happened, but sometime along this path, the leagues also decided to stop providing licenses to multiple companies and started to sign exclusive contracts with individual companies. The players' associations did not make the same agreements, and that's why today you have plenty of cards that are produced with the player's name and likeness, but without a team logo. How much did Fanatics pay for exclusive rights? In 2020, Fanatics made waves when they made agreements to become the exclusive license holder of the MLB, NFL, and NBA cards by the year 2026. At the time Fanatics made these agreements, sports cards were in the middle of a boom that hadn't been seen since the early days of the junk wax era, and they were really willing to risk it for the biscuit when it comes to throwing themselves into the sports card game. It's been reported that after Fanatics made their offer to Major League Baseball, Topps was actually given an opportunity to match the offer, but it was just too rich for their blood. It has been reported by ESPN that the deal was 10 times larger than any licensing deal the MLB Players Association Union had ever agreed to. How much precisely the whole thing adds up to, it's hard to say. I couldn't find anything that said anything concrete when it came to the numbers, just a lot of speculation and some leaked memos. Similarly, there was no specifics that have been shared in relation to the NFL or NBA, but I imagine the numbers are significant since Panini was not able to match Fanatics' offer, whatever it was. But even as the sports card market has come back down to earth since those unprecedented times, there still seems to be a lot of confidence in the sports card market long term by Fanatics and their investors. A few of Fanatics' investors in 2022, by the way, include the NFL, the NFL Players Association, Major League Baseball and the Major League Baseball Players Association, as well as the National Hockey League. This also means, by the way, that now that Fanatics is stepping into the realm of sports betting, as they've recently reported they're doing with the birth of Fanatics Sportsbook, the NFL, MLB, and NHL will officially be making money based on the success of this sports betting platform. I don't know about you, but that really sits with me the wrong way and seems very hypocritical. The fact that the MLB bans Pete Rose from the Hall of Fame for sports betting and now will be making money themselves from sports betting doesn't seem to add up right in my brain. When I think about all of this, it seems to me that Fanatics paying so much for the rights to license sports cards in the 3 major US sports was a multifaceted business decision. It's not just about the sports cards. By building closer business partnerships with the leagues and the players' associations, Fanatics has created a situation where their own financial success will also lead to more financial success for the leagues and players' associations, giving the leagues vested interest to help support Fanatics' growth. And just as a side note here, while the NHL is now investing in Fanatics, they still give their card licensing rights to Upper Deck, and I haven't heard anything much about that changing. And as another side note, you may have noticed that the NBA wasn't included among leagues that have invested in Fanatics, despite the fact that they have given their licensing rights to them. Interestingly, in relation to sports betting, the NBA actually invested somewhere in the range of $1 billion to become a 3% owner of Sports Radar, who they've given their exclusive betting data rights to. Sports Radar has also made agreements with several international soccer, tennis, and cricket leagues, as well as with the NHL, who seem to have agreements with both Sports Radar and Fanatics when it comes to sports betting. Now, when going out to make this video, I didn't expect to have so much information related to sports betting agreements, and that wasn't supposed to be the focus of the video, but this is where my research into the licensing agreements with Fanatics has led me, as it seems that these two arms of Fanatics, as the sports cards and the sports betting, are both pretty closely related to one another. I personally hope, and hope deeply at that this doesn't mean that the sports card and sports betting arms of Fanatics will become more and more intertwined over time. If there's anything that would cause me to disengage with modern sports cards more than just about anything, it's if sports cards and sports betting become intimately interlinked. I don't doubt that there's a lot related to sports cards that's somewhat similar to sports betting in some ways, but I personally make significant effort to keep the sports betting side of things out of how I engage with the hobby, and I'd be really worried if Fanatics started to make concrete steps to tear down the separation between those two spaces. I don't think that will lead to anything good for anyone except for Fanatics' bottom line. With all that being said, I hope this video was interesting to you. I found it fascinating to research, and I hope my efforts have been useful for you. If so, please do hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment about whatever out of all this stuck out to you the most. See you on the next one. Peace.